creating users. In this nugget, we're going to be taking a look at creating users. And that starts off pretty easy by using the graphical user interface. And it's kind of a next finished wizard that you get started with. And then you open up the user account again to go ahead and add additional properties to it. It's a little bit of a hassle compared to NT4 if that's what you're accustomed to, where you could, in NT4, create all of the attributes for an account in one interface. Here you have to kind of create it, close it, then open it. Anyway, you can do it within the GUI, and there are a lot of very useful options there. There's also a net user command that you can use from the command line to create the user account. And that's something also we've had since the days of NT4. But it also includes a problem in Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003 relating to where those user accounts actually get placed, and we'll look at that. Then we'll also look at creating templates. And this is going to be a very fast and easy way to create a template user account based upon which you can create additional accounts and copy that template that will retain the same properties that are in the template account. You know, if you think about the job of an administrator, isn't a lot of it granting access to resources so that users can do their jobs, or preventing access to resources so that users don't stick their nose in business that they're not supposed to be able to see there? Well, we can do that, and we do a lot of that through things like file system permissions, through IIS permissions, through user rights in policies, all that kind of thing. And in order to do that, we have to specify which user we want to access a resource, which group we want to access a resource, or deny a resource, for example. And when we do that, we look for users' names and group names. Let's show you an example here. If I go to my local file system and I go to Drive C and I right-click on any, it doesn't matter which folder, but let's just go to this temp folder. Right-click on it and choose Properties. Then if I go to the Security tab, I see that we have a list of groups here already in this Access Control List, or ACL. Likewise, I can also add additional users or groups into this. Let's say I wanted to add, for example, trainer. So I add trainer into this, and I always see that the trainer's there as well. Now we're going to address all of this kind of thing a little bit later on when we talk about managing and maintaining access to resources, such as, you know, folders and file system permissions and all that kind of thing. And most of these things explain themselves for the time being, but again, we'll get into more detail about that in a future nugget. For the time being, I want to just point out, however, that whatever permissions you set here or deny, we see a name for the user, we see a name for the groups, but that's not actually what the system sees when it grants or denies access to resources. What does it see? Well, if you go to a command prompt, I'll show you. You can use a command line utility called Who Am I? And besides being a lesser-known Jackie Chan film of the same title, it's also an excellent way to find out information about the currently logged on user. And we can do that in this case by typing in Who Am I/user, and there's a whole bunch of other switches you can look at in the online help system if you want to check this out further. But in this case, for the trainer account that I'm currently logged on as, it gives my flat namespace of the domain nuggetlab /trainer, and then it gives a SID here. This is what we call a SID, a security identifier, S-1-521. That's a common prefix for ever since the days of NT4 for NT4 style operating systems, or any NT style operating system. And then in the middle portion here we have unique identifier that says we're in this domain. This should be unique and should never be duplicated by accident on some other domain. So if someone else creates XYZ domain on the other side of the globe, they should not be able to duplicate this sequence of numbers. At least it would be considered computationally impossible. And then we have the end here at the last dash, 1107. That is the unique identifier for this user account within this domain, within this NT4 style infrastructure. Now, there are a number of different ways to create one of these user accounts. I'm going to show you the first way, and that will be just to use the graphical user interface. And later on, I'll also show you some automated ways to do this as well. What you'll do to create the user in a GUI, or graphical user interface, is to click on Start, Administrative Tools, and then to use Active Directory Users and Computers. And using this method, we'll go to the Phoenix OU, which I've already created in a previous nugget. Otherwise, we would put the users in the users container, computers in the computers container. And then we'd also put our groups in the users container as well. For our purposes, we'll just right-click here in an empty space and choose New, and create a new user. And at this point, we'll just fill in the dialog box. Let's just enter in a username of Trevor Stiles, let's say. Trevor. You can enter in a middle initial if you like. It should say initial, but it says initial Stiles. And then we enter in a user logon name. This is a required field. By the way, the first name and last name and initials are not actually required. The full name is required. The user logon name is required. And the user logon name for pre-Windows 2000 is also required. So we'll enter in Trevor Styles or T Styles here for the user logon name. It automatically fills in the user logon name down here. Then we just click on Next, and we enter in a password for this user. Now, the default password requirements for a Windows Server 2003 environment is at least 7 characters, alphanumeric, upper lowercase, special characters. So you have to have at least 3 of those 4 requirements when you create the password. And that's called password complexity. We'll go ahead and enter in something here. You won't be able to see what I'm typing because it's masked, but I'll tell you what I'm entering in. It's going to be capital N, that's my uppercase, U, and then instead of I'm entering in the word nuggets, but it's going to look, be special like a license plate, NU66 for my G's, and then we'll enter in an ET, and then $ for S. So NU66 ET $. And then here we have the user must change the password at next logon. That's usually a good idea if you're creating a new user account. You'll share this password that you've entered in here with the user, call them on the phone, whatever, and then you'll tell them that they will have to think of a new password when they log on. You can also say the user cannot change the password. That seems kind of interesting. By the way, these are mutually exclusive. If I say the user cannot change the password, then I get a big message saying, hey, you said they have to change the password, but you've given them an impossible situation. How can they do that? So we'll click OK here because we see that we cannot do both of those. And then we also see that the password never expires is another option that can also be selected, or account is disabled. Now, a lot of this looks, especially if you're not used to using user accounts, looks a little impossible or impractical. Why would we say the user can never change the password, or the password never expires, or the account is disabled? Well, a lot of that refers to service accounts. This is for user accounts where we have a physical human being logging on, and we want them to have better security so that they come up with a password that only they know. And in fact, I like that first option because as the administrator, I don't want to know their password because I don't want to ever be accused of logging on to their account and accessing their resources illegitimately. The user cannot change password might be useful if you have a single account that's more generic, user temp, something like that, and you have multiple users that log on with that same password. And you don't want one of the users to change the password and then throwing off all the other users that try to use that same password. Password never expires is useful for service accounts. You see, I'm creating a user account here, Trevor Styles, but some accounts you'll create are service accounts that don't actually have a human being logging onto them. It's actually a little application that starts up in the background, and it waits for something to happen, for example, and that's often known as a service. So that might be one that we would set up for password never expires. Otherwise, if the password does expire, that service cannot start. And then finally, account is disabled. This might be useful if you have a user that has been fired or that has quit. Well, you might want to just disable their account temporarily for a few weeks until we can see whether the company lures them back with a hefty pay package increase or some other thing like that. That way, since it's disabled, we will just be able to re-enable it by clearing a checkbox here, and then they can be back in business. And it's also useful if the user really does quit and they get a replacement, and we will just disable the account until the replacement comes in, and then we'll re-enable the account and possibly rename it as well, so the replacement will continue to have access to the exact same resources. In our case, I'm going to go ahead and clear this because we will be using that actual password, and that'll be just fine for our purposes, so I'll click on Next, and that's pretty much it. Now, some of you that are accustomed to NT4 say, wait a minute, this is kind of weird. That was too easy. I mean, I'm used to seeing a lot more stuff there. Where's the other information? What's their logon hours? What computers can they log on to? There's a whole bunch of stuff that was missing from that, right? Well, you're exactly right. There is a lot of stuff missing from that. In Windows Server 2003, as well as Windows 2000, you now have to create the account first, then you got to go back into the account to open it. Now, the reason why that's required is because there are several properties that cannot be populated until you actually have an account to work with. So we have to do that within Active Directory. And by the way, one of the things that's critical in that is your group membership. Don't be concerned that I just accidentally created a domain admin here or something like that. I mean, it didn't show as group membership. But by default, it creates all new user accounts and puts them in the domain users group membership. So let's go ahead and double click on Trevor Styles, and now we'll see that there's a whole bunch more information that we have here. We'll go ahead and see that we have his display name. We see this, all of this stuff is self-explanatory, so I will not belabor any of that, as well as the address, which is equally self-explanatory. Then we have some stuff here that's the meat of what we're trying to look at. For example, the account information. Oh, there's the logon hours. So you could configure that here. Same as NT4 if you've worked with that in the past. Logon permitted is blue. Logon denied is the white. You know, whichever one you want it to be. I can specify a period of time here where we don't want them to log on during these hours, for example. We can also specify exactly which computers this person logs on to. And this might be useful, for example, if I have temp workers that work in a certain part of my organization that can only log on to any number of the following computers. And we don't want them roaming around the building logging onto the CEO's computer or something like that. So that would be useful for that kind of purpose. And then for the account options, these are mostly the same things we saw a little bit earlier when we actually created the account in regards to their password. Now we do see a couple of other things here. For example, store password using reversible encryption. This is not a good security measure, but what that does is it allows you to use an algorithm that's unknown to you but known to the system, where it can reverse hash that password, and it can determine what the password is from the hash of the password. And the hash is the mathematical result of kind of sending it through a mathematical blender, if you will. Now, this is not usually necessary unless you're working with Macintosh clients or with some IIS applications that also need to see the password by using reversible encryption. With a Macintosh client, the actual Mac client has to be able to see the password locally in order to use the password. So the best solution there is just not use Macintosh, I guess, right? Okay, let's go ahead and scroll down. Oh, by the way, while I'm mentioning that, just kind of a fun little note. I saw online here recently that a Microsoft contractor in one of their buildings took a digital photograph of Microsoft unloading at their loading dock in his building a whole pallet full of Macintosh computers. And then he sent that around on the internet and was quickly fired. All right, let's go ahead and take a look down here at some other things as well. Account is disabled, we explained earlier. Smart card is required for interactive logon. Now, I pointed out earlier in a previous nugget that smart cards are credit card sized devices with certificates on them with a little chip on there that can store a certificate. And that's what can be used for identifying your security credentials. Account is sensitive and cannot be delegated. Now, this really relates to services. You see, you might have read-only access to a folder on the network as a user, and you might use an application that has a service that accesses that same folder, but the service might have full control. Well, you see, now inadvertently, because you're accessing that folder through the service, you might accidentally have full control when you're not supposed to, for example. And you can disable that capability by checking the account is sensitive and cannot be delegated. Now, there's also this item, use DS encryption types for this account. This allows you to use the digital encryption standard, which uses a variety of different encryption types, all the way up to the strongest type, which is an IP security or IPsec triple DES standard, or 3DES. You can also do not use Kerberos pre-authentication. And Kerberos is a mechanism by which users and computers can log on in Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003. If you have some application that can't use Kerberos somehow, then you might need to disable this, but that would be much less security than you would other have. And then you can do an account expires item here. For example, if you have a temporary contractor and their duties with your organization will end after a certain period of time, you can just use this little calendar function and say, hey, we're going to be done with them on January 31st. That way it sets up a little bit of an additional security so that if they were to somehow sneak back in the building and try to do something surreptitiously or maliciously, then their account would be disabled anyway. And then that would prevent them from being able to log in again anyway. Now, let's go look at one more tab, and that's the Member Of tab, where I specify their group membership. By default, like I mentioned, all new users are going to be members of domain users. And then I can also add here as well, and that allows me to add a different group membership. Maybe I want this user to be a backup operator as well. A couple of ways I can do that. I can just type in backup, and then I could click OK, and it would automatically resolve the name and put it in this Member Of list. I can also check the name if I'm not sure if I got it in there right and I want to resolve it to Active Directory. So I click check names there, and it automatically resolves it to backup operators, and we'd be okay then. Now, some of the other tabs we'll discuss, for example, the Profile tab, we'll be discussing that later on as we go. Just in brief, this allows me to specify a location to store user settings, and this allows me to specify a location to store user data. Now, another thing you might want to be aware of is the fact that you can create a user account from the command line, and that's very quick if you want to just create one-off accounts and you just need something to work with real quick for either a lab or a testing environment, or if you got pressure, someone says, hey, create that account right now, the guy's waiting to log on, get going here. So you can go to command prompt and type in netuser, the name of the user, followed by a password /add, like you see in the syntax there, creates the account, and if I go back into the Phoenix OU, I don't see it. Why not? Because it by default puts the new user account in the user's container. You might have other Active Directory aware applications that would do the same thing here. And if I refresh this screen enough times, then it'll eventually show up. There it is. So there's our Mike account. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, number one, it's just less organized. Now I got to go on a bug hunt through the user's container and find out who was just accidentally put there with netuser, and then drag them wherever they go. Plus, the user's container has no policy restrictions of any kind. It's just a container. It's not an organizational unit. Therefore, I can't attach group policy objects to it. That might do a number of things. Mike might not have the software that he needs because group policy can deploy software. Mike might not have restrictions that he should have because group policy can also restrict users' environments. So that puts us in an unenviable situation with that. Computers can also be unrestricted that way as well. So I could go net computer as well and create a computer account. For that, I would just type in netcomputer /client99 /add to create that account. And that's to put that computer account in the computer's container. If I, again, refresh the screen here enough, then there it goes. Now we see the client99 account. Again, just a container, no policies there. Now what I like to do is to go to Nugget Lab, right-click, choose a new organizational unit, and then apply the mother of all policies on that organizational unit so it's totally locked down for users and computers. That way, when I create a new account, even from a command line, it doesn't accidentally get put in computers or users where it has no restrictions whatsoever, and it's much more secure to be able to do that and take the side of caution. So in order to do that, you would use two commands. These are new with Windows Server 2003. The one for users is reader usr for user, and then you enter in the path, and I'll just put everybody in Phoenix for the time being, and I would just do something like this and press enter. The redirection was successful. For the computer, it's very similar. I just do reader CMP. Now it will redirect all the computer accounts to that location. So now if I create a new computer account, let's just create 100. Now it's going to put that computer account into the appropriate location under Phoenix. And if I do a new user, let's create Nancy here, then it will put Nancy in the Phoenix OU as well. So if I click on Phoenix here, refresh the screen, I see that it's created Nancy and Client 100 in this organizational unit because I used reader user reader CMP. Now another thing to be aware of is once I've done that, there's a new attribute assigned to this particular OU, and it's called the isCriticalSystemObject. So that if I try to delete it, it will not let me. And it doesn't really give me a specific reason why, but it's because it has that isCriticalSystemObject attribute on it. And it prevents you from accidentally deleting an organizational unit or a container of some kind that will prevent you from being able to create any new account. So that's a good thing. So the isCriticalSystemObject attribute is kind of like the, touch this and you die attribute. I think I had a girlfriend in college that had that same attribute. But anyway, reader user, reader computer, excellent way to make sure that you don't accidentally drop users and computers into unrestricted containers. And we won't be really using these client 100 and Nancy, so I'm going to delete them for the time being. Now then another thing you can do, if you plan to create multiple accounts all with very similar or the same settings, it's helpful if you create a template account. And what you do here is you'll create an account, disable it, but you'll then enter in the properties for that account or the attributes for that account that will apply to any new accounts that you create off of. Because you can take an account like even this one, right-click on it, and choose copy. And what we'll do is create a template account to copy from. So let's right-click here to choose another account. We'll right-click, choose New, User again. And then we'll just make this our template account. I'll just call it _template. And the reason why I do underscore first is because as this Phoenix OU populates with hundreds or even thousands of accounts, it'll be easier to find template up at the top of the list, and it will appear there because of the special underscore character. So I'll just go here also, template. And then next, enter in my complicated password, which would be nuggets again. And then I'll disable this account as well because I don't want anyone actually using this account. I'm just going to create accounts on this basis, and any new accounts that I create will then again, like I said, have the same properties as this account. So I'll double click on the template account here now, and anything I want to be the same on all the new accounts, I'll go ahead and create. I'll go to the account tab first, and let's say I have salespeople that I'm creating on the basis of this account, and they only work the most from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and I don't want anybody logging on outside of those hours. So I'll just select this area, choose Log On Permitted, and OK. If I want them to log on only to certain computers, then I can enter in those computers here as well. Maybe I have a computer named Client 01. I can click add here, and now they can only log on to that computer, and I can, of course, add more here as necessary. Now the next thing to do is to go to the Profile tab, and we're going to address user profiles later, so I'll leave that blank for now, but I will go ahead and create a home folder for them. You could do it on a local path, which would create a home directory that's a repository for their data on their own local computer, but it's much more practical to connect them to a network drive so that they can access it over the network, and so that you can back it up from a central location and do virus scanning from a central location and the like. I usually give them drive H to make it more intuitive, and then you enter in a UNC path. Problem right now is I don't have a UNC path to a home directory on the network, so I'm going to open up Windows Explorer and go to my data volume, right-click here and choose a new folder. I'll just call it Home to make it more intuitive. Now I'll also need to share it so that they can automatically create subfolders underneath Home that are assigned to each individual user. I usually press Alt-Enter to go to the Properties, or you can right-click on it and choose Properties. In this case, we'll go to Sharing. Then we'll share the folder as Home. We can go to the Permissions, and I'll assign everyone full control. Now you see that by default, Windows Server 2003 assigns everyone read access, which is an attempt to be more secure than default shared permissions under previous operating systems. We're going to go ahead and make it full control anyway, which initially appears to be less secure, but which is actually okay for the home directory because it will automatically create folders for everybody underneath the home directory that automatically have more restrictive permissions on them. So we'll be okay with this for the time being. So then we'll go ahead and close this out, and we'll enter in the path to the UNC path to DC Nugget 1. So we'll go whack whack or backslash DC Nugget 1 backslash, and then we'll call it home, if I can spell. And then we'll enter in %username%, and this is a variable that will automatically fill in the name of the users when their account is created. Now going to the Member Of tab, I might also want to have a group in here that any new users will automatically be a member of. So I could click on Add and add the group, but I don't have any new groups that I've created yet, unless I want to make them all domain admins. That might not be a good idea. So what I'll do here is to right-click and choose a new group. And when I go to the new group here, I'll enter in the name of it. Let's just call it the Phoenix Users Group. And I'm making this a global group, which will be able to be nested inside of other groups throughout other domains within my forest. We'll talk more about groups later on, but that's just for the time being, just a brief explanation. It's also a security group, allowing access to resources as opposed to a distribution group for email. So I've got Phoenix Users created there. I'm going to use Alt-Tab on my keyboard to go back to my account properties, click on Add, and enter in Phoenix Users Group here, and then we're ready to go. Now, notice that I can also set a primary group. This is not something that you'll do very often at all. In fact, I've never had to use this. But if you have certain Macintosh clients or POSIX applications, then you need to set a primary group that it can identify with. In our case, we don't need to do that. Now let's go ahead and create a new user account based on this template account that we have right here. So we'll right-click, and all you have to do is to click Copy. Now once it chooses Copy, then you enter in anything that's unique to this account. So let's just have an account here. Let's call this person, Chloe Snodgrass or something. What a name. Okay. All right. No offense to anyone that's named Snodgrass out there, by the way. C Snodgrass. And we'll just next, and we'll just enter in a password. And again, the user must change the password to the next logon. Now, because the template was disabled, this user account is also disabled. You might want to leave that if you're creating this account on Friday and they're coming in on Monday. Just go ahead and leave it disabled over the weekend, or if they're here and waiting to log on now, of course, I'll clear that. And then pretty much just next and finish, and that's it. Now, let's go ahead and look at Chloe Snodgrass here and see what kind of properties came over from the template. By the way, first of all, on the General tab, even if I had entered in anything from the template account, none of this stuff copies over. So it wouldn't do any good to enter in that on the template. On the address, the only thing that does not come over are the street address properties. But if I entered in any of the rest of this, all the rest of that would have been copied over in the template if I wanted to fill all that stuff in. Here, anything except for the logon names up here at the top, anything else will be copied over that I enter in. For example, the logon hours, see there, sure enough, the logon hours are the same as I specified in the template. And the logon to would be this computer, and again, I could add others. This might be a computer that I would use if that was my trainee computer, and they had to get trained on that one machine before I allowed them to use others, for example. On the Profile tab, anything will copy over under the profile path if I had used that, as well as the home directory down here. But remember, as I said, if I use %username%, then it automatically fills in the user's name there, as we see. If on the template I'd enter in anything in the telephones, none of that would have copied over, so of course I didn't enter anything in there. On the organization tab, all the properties are copied except for the title. Anything else would also be copied over. And then, as I said earlier, the member of will also be copied over, so there's my Phoenix users. In this nugget, we took a look at creating user accounts, and we started off with Active Directory users and computers in the graphical user interface. Now, this is the quick and easy way to create user accounts, especially if you just have to create one here and there. We also took a look at how to use NetUser if you got to create an account real quick. Maybe you're just at a command line and someone needs an account right now. You can go ahead and do that. We also looked at the fact that it dumps those user and computer accounts, by the way, in the users or computers container, respectively. Well, those are unprotected containers, don't have any policies, so I showed you reader user, reader computer to be able to move those objects into different organizational units that can be locked down. Also, they have the is critical system object attribute, and that attribute is set to true, preventing them from being deleted. Then we looked at templates, and these are a quick and easy way to create multiple accounts based on a single account that you create as a template and disable, and that way you can retain all the properties of that template account and not have to duplicate them when you create new accounts. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.